down here in relation to the Space Center. You know, covering stories down here, I can tell you that any restaurant you walk into down here will have photographs of the astronauts who eat at those places routinely, and then of course they bring in their press photo and sign it for them, and they have it up on the walls there. You know, these are photographs that go back for years and years, and so it's a it's a real good, just real tradition down here for the astronauts. They they enjoy being here. They train here for several months out of the year. In many cases, they'll train for a couple of years on one of these space shuttle missions. So they do know their way around here. They do know the people in the community. They do go to schools. They do talk to folks all over the city down here. So obviously this is something that the community, as you can see with the flowers and whatnot, people are just heartbroken that this has happened and heartbroken that these astronauts are now lost.
That's Jeff Ealing reporting live from the Johnson Space Center. Thanks, Jeff. In fact, they're neighbors.
That's right.
People in the Clear Lake area have astronauts as neighbors. It's not necessarily a ho-hum thing, but they try and, respect their privacy, or, they're friends in the neighborhoods and they have parties sometimes and invite the astronauts over when they're neighbors, right, Jeff?
That is absolutely right. I mean, these astronauts are members of this community for the time that they are here. Some of them live here year-round. The commanders on the space shuttles will live here year-round typically, but the payload specialists, crewmen, people like that, generally don't live in this area for more than a couple of years, as I said, when they're getting ready to train prior to the missions going up. So these people are well rooted in the community, and there is a great sense of sadness, not just because a shuttle has been lost, but because of the people that were in that shuttle. These are people who the folks here quite honestly would have seen just a few weeks ago, and they wish them well when they took their flight out to Florida to get on board the shuttle and begin the 16-day mission that ended so tragically over Central Texas.
All right, Jeff Ealing, thanks once again. We'll stay tuned, or stand by, I should say. We'll come back to you whenever we get some more information from the Johnson Space Center.
And again, this happened just minutes before it was scheduled to land.
Yeah, so, exactly. About 15 minutes before the shuttle was scheduled to land, it exploded in midair over North Texas this morning. Much of the debris, as we said, has been strewn across East Texas, and Joe Whitehead is a person in Nacogdoches who's on the phone with us now. And Mr. Whitehead, what did you hear this morning?
Well, I just arrived here in Nacogdoches myself. I'm on the scene, unsecured scene right now, of about a half a dozen pieces strewn across the field of about 40 acres. And it ranges from what appears to be some of the tile, the outer skin,
right,
and some computer components.
And where is this, east of Nacogdoches, did you say?
It's just on the outskirts, southeast of Nacogdoches. It's just right outside the city limits.
Okay. We had also heard that a piece of debris had apparently fallen into a bank in Nacogdoches. Can you confirm that for us?
Not in the bank, but in the parking lot of the bank.
Okay, in the parking lot. Was it a sizable piece of debris?
Pretty good size.
Okay. And there are also reports that in San Augustine County, and I know that's to the east of Nacogdoches, that authorities have recovered some type of human remains. Do you have any information on that?
The information that was given to me was 2 body parts, and I just assume leave those as that.
Okay.
When you say that you're securing the scene, can you tell us how you're doing that?
Just keeping people back away from the parts until NASA officials can get to it.
Okay. We've talked to a number of people in that area this morning, Joe. Obviously stunned, but there is also quite a frenzy there. People trying to do their best to get pictures of the debris and just to see the scene, right?
It's pretty chaotic. It's after like a major storm, people come out like out of the woodwork, and that's kind of how it is here. And it's kind of hindering authorities of doing their job properly. And if the city folks could just kind of wait and get information from the local officials, let them collect the things, would be a real good thing. But we do have a little bit of bedlam going on up here.
Right. Is it an exaggeration to say that the debris is all over the place?
No, it's not an exaggeration, not at all. Like I said, I came in a little while ago, and coming in on the road I was in, I had to go around several barricaded parts of the road where debris was laying on the road. So it's one of those, unfortunately, it looks like one of those things made for Hollywood.
Right. And are you with a government agency, the DPS, or National Guard?
I'm just anonymous. Anonymous.
Okay. You're just up there helping secure the scenes.
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
Well, Joe, we appreciate your thoughts this morning and what you have added so far. We're looking at pictures now taken earlier this morning of a huge piece of debris in between the interstate lanes in East Texas. We're not exactly sure where that was taken. It was taken by a Dallas News helicopter. A huge piece of debris that actually is embedded in the ground because it came down so hard.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are probably wishing or wondering if they can help out, but right now probably the best thing to do is if you do see anything or come across any kind of debris, just stop and call local authorities. There's not much any of us can do, but perhaps pray for the families.
Right. As we have said, 7 crew members were on board the Shuttle Columbia when it exploded in midair. They had been up in space for a 16-day scientific research mission. This was not a mission to the International Space Station, as most of the previous shuttle missions had been in the last 3 years. 7-member crew, only 2 of them with previous flight experience. That was the commander and the mission payload specialist, Michael Anderson. The commander, Rick Husband, Texas native from Amarillo, 45 years old. He has a wife and 2 kids. And then the payload specialist, as I said, Michael Anderson, the payload commander, 43-year-old son of an Air Force man. He also had previous flight experience. He actually went up on a Russian Mir space station, a trip to the Russian Mir space station back in 1998. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, a guy who grew up in a military family on military bases all around. One of the black astronauts chosen in 1994, for the astronaut crew.
Pilot William McCool, 41, Navy commander from Lubbock, Texas. He's also a father of 3 sons. He graduated second in his 1983 class at the Naval Academy. He went on to test pilot school and became an astronaut in 1996. This was his first space flight.
And Kalpana Chawla is a native of India. She's a 41-year-old woman who emigrated to the United States back in the 1980s. She then became an astronaut in 1994, and she was actually something of a hero back in India because she was one of the first Indian astronauts to go into space in 1996. She made mistakes, she said, that sent the science satellite tumbling out of control. She said the other astronauts had to go on a spacewalk to capture it, but she was part of the NASA space program. It was not a huge mistake. That was her words. And she is a person who went through a lot of training over the past number of years, and she said she was just absolutely thrilled to be involved with NASA's space program. She is now a U.S. citizen and has been in this country for a number of years. 41 years old. I don't know whether she was married or not.
Ilan Ramon, 48, a colonel in Israel's Air Force and the first Israeli in space. His mother and grandmother survived Auschwitz death camp. His father fought for Israel's statehood alongside his grandfather. He fought in the Yom Kippur War, 1973, and the Lebanon War, 1982, considered a hero.
Yeah, he is, because he's a former fighter pilot and a war hero in Israel. He's also a colonel in the Israeli Air Force, and he had moved here to the United States just shortly after he got involved in the astronaut training program in 1997. His wife and children, from what I understand, his wife and I think 4 children continued to live in Tel Aviv. They made periodic visits here. They were in Florida this morning waiting for the touchdown when they got word that the Columbia had exploded. But again, he is a war hero and a person who was making history for Israel, being the first Israeli astronaut in space. This was a huge day for Israel and for Jews around the world. And security, because he was on the flight, was extremely tight, or much tighter than it is usually. Security's been extremely tight since 9/11.
I think a lot of people were perhaps concerned right off the bat that this might have been some type of terrorist activity, but right now the experts are saying that they do not believe that this was the case at all.
Yeah, they have no indication at all. David Brown was also on the flight. He's a Navy captain. He's 46 years old. He's kind of unique because David Brown is both a pilot and he's a doctor. In fact, he had joined the Navy after a medical internship, and then he went on to fly an F-18 and became an astronaut in 1996. This mission was his first space flight, but he was one of those who was going to conduct some medical research experiments on his fellow astronauts. And then, finally, there was Laurel Clark, 41-year-old Navy person who was actually a diving instructor early on.
Very different people, but I think it's easy to say that they shared at least one common thing, and that would be their love of being an astronaut. Yep,
and she was from Racine, Wisconsin, 41-year-old Laura Clark, and she's married and she has an 8-year-old son, and she was on board this mission to help conduct those some 80-odd scientific experiments. There's a live picture of the sign outside the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center this morning where you see 7 yellow balloons representing the astronauts who have apparently perished in this tragedy of Columbia this morning, and news crews on the scene. People leaving mementos, flowers, different things outside the gate to remember the astronauts and to honor their service to our country.
Really just a tragedy for all of America, especially for the astronauts' families. I think what we're seeing right now is just the beginning. We're going to see a lot of tribute being paid to our heroes.
That's right. People have reported debris, as we said, all over East Texas, and much of the debris has been the tiles that protected the space shuttle. The shuttle, as many of you probably know, has some 20,000 heat protection tiles on the outside of it. They're about 3.5 inches square, and they're made of silica fibers. They're kind of bonded together at high temperatures. There was some concern with earlier shuttle flights because some of the tiles had come off during the flights, and they said had enough tiles peeled away, it could have led to trouble for the space shuttle because of the intense heat as it goes into space and as it comes down its descent. There is no indication that that played any role. There was also a piece of insulation foam that came off the space shuttle near one of its engines as it lifted off on January 16th. It hit part of the wing, but it was such a tiny piece that NASA, there it is, there's pictures of the space shuttle as it launched on January 16th. NASA went out of its way to reassure reporters, even up until this last Friday, yesterday, that the piece of debris hitting the wing was not a safety problem at all.
And the shuttle's actually somewhat of essentially a glider during the hour-long descent from orbit toward the landing strip, as you said, covered by about 20,000 thermal tiles, and they are there to protect against temperatures as high as 3,000 degrees.
That's right. As a matter of fact, when the shuttle makes its landing, or it makes its descent, and this morning it was about 40 miles above the Earth as it made its way toward Cape Canaveral in Florida. It makes a series of banking moves and slight turns just so that it can maneuver out of the atmosphere as it comes back down to Earth. And then it's going about, well, we had said Mach 6, which would have been 12,500 miles an hour. You heard the NASA administrator say it was actually going near Mach 13. That's 39,000 miles an hour. So that is why I think they've ruled out terrorism, because it's 40 miles in the air, it's traveling that fast. It would be virtually impossible to pick something out of the sky with any kind of missile.
And another thing very unusual today, I believe this is the first time an accident like this has happened on descent.
That's right. The shuttle Columbia went up on its way to orbit, blew up in January 28th, 1986. 17 years and 3 days ago. This, of course, is February 1st. And then there was the other Apollo accident, and when 3 astronauts burned to death as they sat waiting for the Apollo to launch back in the 80s as well, or was that in the 70s?
We do know that just this past week, NASA was getting ready to observe the anniversary of its only 2 other space tragedies, both which you just talked about.
Right, and that was when 3 astronauts perished in that fire when the Apollo flight burned up just as it was about to launch, as the astronauts sat there. There is a ceiling of a home in East Texas. We're not exactly sure where. There is the debris that came through the ceiling and landed next to someone's computer. There have been reports of huge chunks of debris hitting homes. In fact, one man in Nacogdoches told us earlier this morning his roof has a sizable dent in it from about a 6-foot piece of debris that hit his roof and then bounced off and into his field this morning. An
important note to make, that we have had all this debris fall, but there have not been any reports, at least I don't think so, of serious injury.
Of anyone injured at all.
Which is amazing.
It is. We have had reports in East Texas of some fires burning in fields because of the debris that came down smoldering or perhaps in flames. And we saw pictures earlier this morning of some fields on fire, but they were quickly extinguished. There's a sizable piece of debris, and it almost looks like one of the pieces of the shuttle engine. I don't know exactly what it was, but it came down to Earth rather hard, falling out of the sky because it's embedded in the Earth there. And people took upon themselves in East Texas this morning. Authorities came out, roped off areas. People took it upon themselves to secure pieces of the debris, putting it in the back of their pickup trucks, putting it away in a hangar, which is one case in Nacogdoches at the airport, and securing it so authorities could come and pick it up. And the National Guard has been on the scene from Nacogdoches all the way through Palestine and into San Augustine County, and even in western Louisiana this morning.
And that is what officials are asking people to do, secure the debris that has fallen. They don't necessarily want them to touch it or try to move it, just contact local authorities and let them know that it's there, worried that it may have some toxic chemicals on the debris.
Yeah, and if you're just joining us this morning, we're providing live coverage of the Columbia disaster. Columbia, the shuttle, exploded as it was coming down this morning about 40 miles above the Earth in North Texas, and then debris fell to the Earth and scattered all across East Texas. In fact, a 75-mile path of debris, coming to Earth that was actually captured by radar. NOAA radar this morning actually captured it, and if we check the radar from earlier, you can see that it almost looks like a line of thunderstorms that moved through East Texas and western Louisiana this morning. It was crystal clear skies this morning, perfect weather. That image that you see in the middle of your screen that appears to be thunderstorms is actually the debris falling to Earth. And again, as Ed Brandon pointed out earlier, it's 40 miles up in the air. Particles of debris continued to fall and drift down through the atmosphere. Tiny, tiny particles that may still actually be drifting to Earth, held up there by the winds or the steering currents. This is almost 5 hours after the tragedy happened.
And again, it was just an absolutely perfect day. So they do not believe that weather was any type of concern. President Bush has been returning from Camp David to the White House to deal with the apparent loss of Space Shuttle Columbia. A Homeland Security Department spokesperson says there's no information that terrorism was involved in Columbia's disappearance. We've just got word that we will be hearing from the president in less than 5 minutes, and we will, of course, bring that to you live when that happens.
That's right. Again, this is the first time in 42 years of U.S. spaceflight history that any problem has gone on during the landing phase. You know about the shuttle Challenger, which blew up on its ascent in 1986, and the earlier problem with the astronauts who died in the 70s on the launch pad. This is the first time they've ever had any problem on the landing. And in fact, NASA was very, very confident of its shuttle program, that it had gotten the risks down to a very, very low level, that it had so many redundancies built into the shuttle that backup systems were there that could take over if the shuttle lost control. There was some indication this morning that perhaps the commanders might have lost control because people reported seeing it wobble. NASA did have 5 to 6 seconds, apparently, of information before they lost touch with the shuttle Columbia this morning. 5 to 6 seconds of crucial information from their computers. And as Sheriff Fryer pointed out earlier, Stephanie, the shuttle's like a flying black box in itself because there's so much information coming out of that from the computers that NASA can track it wherever it goes. And then 8 o'clock this morning, it suddenly disappeared from communication.
Former astronaut John Glenn says after several minutes without contact from the Space Shuttle Columbia, he knew, quote, something was terribly wrong. Despite today's events, Glenn says NASA has had an amazing safety record over the years. We know that the next scheduled mission was to be in March.
That's right, and that was a mission to go up to the International Space Station, where 3 astronauts now reside. They were going to go up there and pick up those astronauts, bring them back to Earth. I'm not sure if 3 others were going to replace them, but that is a problem for NASA now because they have to figure out a way to go up to the International Space Station and bring those people back. They could use a Russian spacecraft, a Soyuz rocket, to go up, and that may indeed be the way they get up to the International Space Station in the next couple of months to retrieve those astronauts, because after the Challenger disaster in 1986, the shuttle program was shut down for a full 2 years, and the indications are that is likely to happen again, that the shuttle program will be shut down. There will be no more flights until they figure out what went wrong.
And that is definitely going to take an extended period of time. No one really knows how long it's going to be before we know exactly what caused this crash.
73 seconds after takeoff is when the shuttle Challenger exploded in 1986. Again, 7 astronauts, if you'll remember, died on that space flight, including the teacher, supposed to be the first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe. The next teacher in space, Barbara Morgan, was supposed to go up on a shuttle flight in November. Again, that obviously has been postponed now because the flights will not be going up anytime soon. And there were 7 astronauts on board this flight, all of whom apparently perished this morning when Columbia exploded in midair over North Texas.
Many of those family members in Florida right now being counseled by NASA officials there.
Right.
We can only imagine the grieving that they're going through right now, and our hearts go out to them.
Yep, and they've heard from the president this morning, who called the family members to express his condolences and his sympathy. And we are waiting to hear from the president at the White House. He has just returned there this morning to update Americans on what happens next with not only our shuttle program, but our space program in general. And we'll bring you the live press conference from the White House and the president's statement as soon as that becomes available. As a matter of fact, we're trying to get some of our reporters as well to give us an update from East Texas. And Jeff Ealing's live at the Johnson Space Center. He is waiting for word, too, from NASA officials at the Johnson Space Center this morning.
And that's where people have already started bringing balloons and flowers, paying tribute to the men and women that we lost and who we consider heroes.
That's right. Some of the debris, as we said, fell all across a wide swath of East Texas, and there is the debris field as we have outlined it on our graphic. Palestine, Texas is some 75 miles from the Louisiana border, and the debris field started just west of Palestine and stretches all the way into Louisiana. And there were reports earlier this morning that some debris was found in Arkansas as well, just east of Texarkana. And this is a debris field probably, as I said, 75 miles long and maybe another 40 or so miles wide. And that is where, as somebody said, it is not an exaggeration to say that debris was scattered all over the place in East Texas this morning.
And really the area that we're talking about, a lot of small towns, open fields.
Right. Lots of rural areas. Let's go to Deborah Wrigley. She's live outside the Johnson Space Center this morning to bring us up to date on what's going on there. Deborah?
Tom, you can see the flags here. They are at half-staff. We are directly across the street from JSC. We'll walk right over here, right outside that familiar marker to the Johnson Space Center. You can see wreaths. We have been seeing those all morning. People have been coming here, one man driving as far as we are told as from Dallas to be here today. Now, it is customary that astronauts' homes are guarded in the event of tragedy. So it is today in one neighborhood not far from here. This is the home where an astronaut, Kalpina Chalwa, lived. The 41-year-old woman, known as Casey to her neighbors, apparently spoke little of this mission. It was only through news reports that they learned that one of their own was gone.
It's just devastating. It's just a horrible thing. I don't know. You know, I fully believe in the space program. I think it's something that we have to support. And you know, sometimes I think that as few accidents as we've had, it's been great, considering. But anytime anything like this happens, it's horrible.
She calls herself Kate. She helped out, and as far as I'm concerned, she was the first volunteer when we asked for help in this community to clean up our park. And part of the reason she cleaned it up is because she used it. So she was a kayaker. So it's quite a loss. And
First the Challenger, now the Columbia. It is a double loss for these communities that were built around the Johnson Space Center to serve the people who work here. Astronauts live throughout this community. They have for years. They know only too well the loss that their families are feeling. Back to you.
And Deborah, as we've said with Jeff Ealing earlier, they're neighbors there. People know them. They go to church with them. It is just, I mean, it's a shock for all of us, but certainly for the people who knew and loved them.
You can go anywhere around here. We were speaking with one woman, and I asked her, you know, as somebody from a space community, how must you feel? And she said, well, I used to be married to an astronaut. That is how common that this is down here.
All right, we're going to take you live to the White House. Deborah Wrigley, thank you very much. President Bush and his statement from Washington.
News and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors. On board was a crew of 7. Colonel Rick Husband, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Anderson, Commander Laurel Clark, Captain David Brown, Commander William McCool, Dr. Kulpna Shavla, and Ilan Ramon, a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. These men and women assumed great risk in the service to all humanity. In an age when space flight has come to seem almost routine, it is easy to overlook the dangers of travel by rocket and the difficulties of navigating the fierce outer atmosphere of the Earth. These astronauts knew the dangers, and they faced them willingly, knowing they had a high and noble purpose in life. Because of their courage and daring and idealism, we will miss them all the more. All Americans today are thinking as well of the families of these men and women who have been given this sudden shock and grief. You're not alone. Our entire nation grieves with you. And those you loved will always have the respect and gratitude of this country. The cause in which they died will continue. Mankind is led into the darkness beyond our world by the inspiration of discovery and the longing to understand. Our journey into space will go on. In the skies today, we saw destruction and tragedy. Yet farther than we can see, there is comfort and hope. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry hosts one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, Not one of them is missing. The same Creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today. The crew of the Shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. May God bless the grieving families, and may God continue to bless America.
President Bush's deep personal religious inclinations leading him at the end to quote Isaiah, the Creator who created the stars, knows the crew's names as well. Lift your eyes, who look to the heaven, and who created all of them. And we'll look up in a short while the references that President Reagan made on the occasion of the Challenger disaster, when he found comfort and assistance and leadership, as often the public leaders do, in the words from the Bible. And the President says this morning exactly what other people have said, that it's easy to overlook the dangers of space travel, but these members of this crew were on a high and noble purpose, and the President saying something that the members of the space community particularly will want to hear. Their cause will continue. They were inspired and inspirers of discovery, and therefore you get from the President this morning the precise encouragement for the program to go forward. Here are the members of the Columbia crew training before this mission began 16 days ago. Commander Rick Husband, the Air Force colonel from Amarillo, who was the commander, and Bill McCool, the Navy commander from Lubbock, who was the pilot on this. They were, of course, to the best of our knowledge, under the control of the computers as they began this re-entry process. But they're a very independent lot, these astronauts, over the years, particularly the pilots and the commanders, going all the way back to the Mercury programs when they said, thank you very much, we are not just... In the early days of the program, you remember we sent chimps, and the Russians sent dogs into space. And a very conscious political decision in the early days of the American space program to make the pilots, the astronauts, the very singular stars of the program. And it was one of the ways, of course, perhaps the crucial way in which the American public came to identify with discovery in space, was that all of the astronauts became so extraordinarily familiar. I don't know precisely who that is, but it may be Laurel Clark, one of the 2 women on board. She'd been a medical officer in submarines, who became an astronaut in 1996. And this was, of course, a scientific mission. As the President and others have pointed out, this was pushing back just not only the frontiers of space, as always. Here on the near side, by the way, that's Michael Anderson, the payload commander, and pushing not only space, but pushing science. And there were a lot of science projects on this particular mission that made it very connected to people in business and in scientific research and in schools throughout the country, who all had some connection to this particular mission. We are joined on the phone this morning by an old friend of ours, and one of the true stars of the Apollo space program, Gene Cernan. Gene, can you hear me?
I sure can, Peter.
You're at home in Houston, are you, this morning?
Yeah, I just walked in, sort of like everyone else, overpowered by the events.
Well, just to remind folks who you are, Gene Cernan is the last man to have walked on the moon in the American moon program. Talk a little, Gene, if you would, about the space community, to which I know you're still very deeply attached.
Well, you know, I think everyone probably has a feeling of emptiness. You know, we can say that it's risky. We can talk about how the fact that it's going to happen again. We can say we expect these kind of things, but excuse me, that doesn't really help. When they happen, they all sort of hit us in the gut. And I think everyone in the entire space community feels that way. You know, I haven't been officially involved in almost 30 years now, and yet we're still all part of one family. I think even though I haven't flown a shuttle, you tend to know what they're going through and the commitment they have to do the job they're doing, and that's why it hurts even more.
Gene, I think we actually just celebrated your 30th anniversary of your walk, if your walk on the moon. There's always been, and I don't want to make light of this, there's always been a bit of bravado in the space community about danger. You talk a little bit about danger. I think you did in your book.
Well, yeah, you know, you don't. People always ask about were you scared and talk about fear, and I think we even who go, those of us who fly, we don't overlook it. We tend to think that we can manage it, and I guess you know me well enough, Peter. There's things that become more important than being scared when you go to the moon or when you're flying a space shuttle, and it's those important things. It's a commitment. It's something you believe in. It's something you think is worthwhile. Are we willing to give our lives? Are we willing to get stuck on a moon? Well, you know, I didn't go to the moon not to come home. I had every intention of returning. I didn't go to be a martyr, and so not surviving never really crossed my mind. Although in the back of it somewhere, I knew that it was possible. I knew that it could happen.
Gene, there was a time in the space program when, I won't use the word cowboys, but it was all about adventure. And of course, this was a scientific mission this morning, and at least 2 of the people on board, Kalpana Chawla, born in India, emigrated here, and Laurel Clark, 2 women, have gone into space for science in this particular case. Did you feel the space program give way from adventure to space, to science, or was the adventure always there?
Well, I think the adventure was there, and I think the adventure is still there. Anyone who has gone or is going or recently been on board a shuttle, let me tell you, it's adventurous. It's adventurous to go into space. It's adventurous to try to fly around the world and at those speeds. Yeah, it doesn't have, and I may be one of the ones who's guilty of being a little critical. It doesn't have the hoopla of going to the moon, but in retrospect, it's exciting, it's adventurous, and those young men and women in today's program, many of whom are really literally young enough to be my sons and daughters, are just as committed and just as excited about going. It's just, there's nothing routine, there's nothing rote about it. Yes, it's scientific. Their goal in life is to come back with something that has significant meaning for the future of the people on this earth, and they're working very hard to make that happen.
Do you think NASA is still as conscientious as it was in your day?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about it. Perhaps even more conscientious, and we'll probably get a full realization of that, because it's going to be, you know, whose guess, a year or more before we ever unscramble what really happened, what caused, if it was a breakup, what caused the breakup, and get it solved and get on with it. But I'm one of those who believes, you know, we will find a problem, we will get it solved, and we will be back. There's no question in my mind that in the long run we will prevail.
Gene, it is good and reassuring to hear your voice. I'm sorry about the circumstances, as we know, but it's good to hear your voice.
Peter, we ought to get together once in a while on happier times. It's unfortunate we have to wait until a situation like this, but I guess it brings to life what is really happening, and something that a lot of people consider, you know, routine.
I'll call you. Thanks, Gene.
God bless, Peter. Thank you.
Gene Cernan, the last American to walk on the moon, which takes us to...
And that was Peter Jennings interviewing Gene Cernan from his home here in Houston, and Tom Cook along with Stephanie Guadian bringing you the live local coverage now of the Columbia tragedy, the disaster this morning as Columbia exploded over North Texas, and then debris was strewn all across a field in East Texas. There is the debris field on our graphic, all the way from Palestine, Texas to the Louisiana border. Some 75 miles long is that debris field, perhaps 20 to 30 miles wide, although we do have reports that some debris was found as far north as Arkansas, east of Texarkana this morning.
And that debris landing in people's yards, on their cars, actually inside at least a couple of people's homes. But so far, no reports of any injuries from this.
All right, let's take you live to the Johnson Space Center. Deborah Wrigley's live outside there with the latest. Deborah?
We've been talking about the memorial that's going up across the street. You can see the crowd of people here. Here are some folks who have been over there. Jason Lackey from Pasadena. we were talking, and your mother called you and told you what was going on.
Well, she told me I needed to go turn on the TV because that there was an accident over Dallas and it involved the space shuttle.
And you were only in the 3rd grade when the other shuttle exploded.
That's correct. I came home from school and she asked me what happened, and I said the space shuttle went into space, and she said no, there's, you know, that's when she told me that that one exploded.
And you came over here, I guess, to be a part of it, just to do something.
Yeah, just, and like I told you before, it's just a national tragedy, and we just felt like we needed to remember the astronauts.
It's such an awful thing, and your children, they're too young, but what do you think you'll tell them in years to come?
Well, I just would imagine we'll tell them that we both got a chance to go over there and remember some great people, some heroes of our country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lackey. Over here, we have Melissa Slaughter and her children. You're from San Leon. Yeah. You have your flowers. Why did you want to come over here?
Well, we were driving by, and we saw the people putting flowers over there, and it really brought tears to my eyes and made me feel something in my heart. As I was watching on TV today, I just remembered when I was in 8th grade and the first space shuttle blew up, and my heart goes out to the families and everyone, and I really don't know what to say except for my prayers are with them. And God bless America. And
yeah. You brought your children. What do you want them to remember about this?
I just want them to remember that we live in a great country, and that's why we're doing this, because we're Americans. And that's why we live in Houston, and we need to be here to show our support for the astronauts and for NASA.
It's a national tragedy, as Mr. Lackey said. It's also a community tragedy.
Right.
Because these are neighbors around here. These are people that folks know, they shop with, they go to church with. So it's like losing one of your own, too.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Slaughter. We'll let you go take your flowers over there. Those are some of the sentiments that are going into this event. It is a makeshift memorial. It sprung up, I would say, less than an hour after the news broke of the tragedy this morning. People coming and going. There are large easels, if we can go over there, easels of flowers, people coming back and forth. At one point, so many people were lining up along the entrance to NASA that the DPS was called in. They said it was a traffic hazard. So people parking all around here, walking across there just to think a moment, pause a moment, pray a moment, and be with others who care about this. Back to you.
And Deborah, for those of us who covered the Challenger disaster in '86, that same sense of just overwhelming shock comes back, doesn't it?
It is. I was here 17 years ago.
I remember.
I remember when I got the call, and it's one of those things of disbelief. We were talking about the difference when the Challenger exploded on impact. It was much larger. This more subtle, and as one person said, it was amazing because some people didn't know what they were seeing. It was so high up. It was much more subtle. It takes things longer to sink in. But I ran into the house and I told someone, I've got to go. The shuttle has exploded again. And that's perhaps the most chilling word about this, again.
Yep, and that's exactly what I felt when I saw it this morning. I said, I have to go. The shuttle has exploded again. Deborah Wrigley, thanks, outside the Johnson Space Center. And of course, we have a mock-up here of the shuttle. This says Discovery on it, but this is what the space shuttles look like. And if you remember back in '86, it was a problem with the O-rings on the bottom of the fuel tanks that caused a fuel leak, and that is apparently the decision of NASA as to what caused the 1986 Challenger explosion. There was a problem, and now I want to emphasize it was a slight problem. A piece of insulation from the shuttle, Columbia, when it launched January 16th, just 16 days ago, came off some part of the upper part of the shuttle and apparently hit the left wing. NASA determined that it was such a small piece of foam insulation that it did not affect the wings and that it would not affect the rest of their flight. And they even went out of their way to say this past Friday that it would not affect today's landing. And I want to reemphasize once again, we have no idea what caused today's explosion in midair. NASA has ruled out any terrorist act because the shuttle, as we've said, was 40 miles up in the air and traveling almost 39,000 miles an hour. It would have been impossible for any kind of missile to hit it.
Exactly. We want to remind people, too, that this is the first time in 42 years of U.S. human space flight that an accident has happened like this during the descent.
That's right. And actually, the debris was so wide scattered over East Texas this morning, and if you've just joined us and not seen the radar images, we can show you that. There is the debris field as we've described it on our graphic this morning, some 75 miles long, all across East Texas. But here is the radar image picked up by NOAA radar this morning. Those streaks in the middle of your screen that look like thunderstorms, those are actually images of the debris field falling to Earth, or the debris, I should say, falling to Earth. That's how wide that debris field was and how long it was. And as Ed Brandon described it to us, minute particles were even showing up on radar 3 hours or so, Ed, afterward, 3 to 3.5 hours afterward, you could see the radar images because, as Ed described, radar, it's based on the ground, it shoots up into the air, into the atmosphere, if you will, and it reflects off of things coming down. So if there's rain coming down, the echo images come back to the radar and it shows rain. If there's something else falling out of the sky, that too would be captured by the radar, and that was the debris falling this morning.
And speaking of that debris, we've had numerous phone calls from people calling in saying that they have found that in their yard, on top of their cars, in their homes. Officials are out there right now, including military officials, and their job, their task right now is going to be trying to secure that area. That debris is going to be very important into the investigation, trying to determine exactly why this happened. People are being asked, if they do find debris, not to touch it, not to move it, but rather call your local officials.
And there's a wider shot of our radar. The analysis that you can see from, this is, and Tim Heller's here. Is that Doppler radar that we're looking at? A wide picture of Doppler radar, composite radar?
Yes, but notice the time.
Oh, the time lapse. And there it is at 1:15 p.m. So that's just 7 minutes ago. And some of those particles are still showing up on radar, you're telling me. So this, now you're looking at, is this from, let's see,
back to
7 o'clock this morning, Tim is saying, to 1:15 this afternoon. So just 7 minutes ago. Obviously, there were still some very, very minute particles still in the atmosphere that are showing up on radar. And you can still see just how many of those particles are up in space or still in the atmosphere this morning. Again, it was a picture-perfect day. It was clear weather. Of course, the shuttle's up 40 miles. It's in the atmosphere, so there is no weather up there. And Tim, can you describe, I know you've just got a microphone on, can you describe for us what we're seeing?
What this is what they call a composite reflectivity image. And what they're doing here is we're looking at the radar at many levels of the atmosphere. So no matter where the debris is within the atmosphere, we can see it. So obviously, as it descends through the atmosphere from higher up, we'll pick it up at all different levels. We start the time lapse back at 7 o'clock this morning, just so that you could see there was nothing out there on the radar screen. And literally between 8 o'clock and 8:10, all of a sudden you get that streak of reflectivity showing up in the northeastern corner of the state, and then now sliding off to the southeast. Upper level winds are at about 10 to 15 miles per hour. They're coming in out of the northwest, so that's why the movement of the debris is into that particular direction.
So this would almost have to be, I hate to use the word microscopic, but tiny, tiny particles that are still floating in the atmosphere, almost like dust particles.
Doppler radar is extremely sensitive. At times, the military will shoot up chaff into the atmosphere, which is very small pieces of aluminum, and they use that to test radar, to track things on the radar. And so, indeed, microscopic pieces of debris could be in the air and still picked up. This, by the way, is a very sensitive mode of the radar, what they call a clear air mode. Because there's no precipitation in the area, they're turning the radar into a very sensitive mode, which is why we're able to see this. If there was rain in the air, it might be harder to see, but the way the radar is set up today, it's picking this debris up very clearly.
Is there any indication of how long these radar images might last?
What I'm noticing here is that we're starting to see toward the end of the time lapse, we're starting to see lighter and lighter returns, which means that, and you also notice that the area is becoming a little more widespread, which means it's probably either descending to the earth or becoming blown out of the atmosphere, just kind of slowly mixing with the air. You know, this could float around for another couple of hours. It, in fact, may end up in the atmosphere across southeast Louisiana and southern Mississippi.
Let me ask you this, maybe a scientific but unscientific way to ask this. Ed said 40 miles up, it's atmosphere, there's no weather. Where does weather end and the atmosphere begin?
Well, it depends on the day, depends on the weather. Literally, the lower part of the atmosphere is what we call the troposphere, the turning sphere. That's where all of your significant weather takes place. The radar obviously is not going to shoot up that high, and so in this case we're seeing the debris as it gets down to radar level,
which would be.
Well, in this case, because we're talking about Lake Charles, we're talking maybe about 150 miles up in the atmosphere, because the radar is originating here from Lake Charles, which is why we got the false echo pattern there. It shoots out, in this case, all the way around Lake Charles, and that distance out would be about 150 miles up in the air. 120 to 150 miles up in the air. We're talking the maximum of the radar beam.
Okay.
Because as it goes out from the radar site, it literally expands over the horizon.
Okay.
And that's why we're, in one sense, that's why we're able to see the debris here throughout the atmosphere, is because the radar beam at that distance from the radar site is so wide.
Okay.
It's able to pick it all up.
Well, it was just amazing when Ed first pointed that out to us this morning, that you could see the debris coming to Earth on radar. I was thinking, how is that possible? But as he explained it, it's just an echo that goes out from the Earth, and the returns show back whether it's rain falling or something else.
That's exactly right. And again, I pointed out a minute ago, you go from 8:05 to 8:10, and you go from nothing on the radar to a streak that is probably 150 miles long.
All right. Chief Meteorologist Tim Heller, thanks. You've explained a lot.
Right now, we want to go to Patrick Nolan. He is standing by at Johnson Space Center. Patrick.
Very emotional scene here. That's a phrase I'm sure you all have heard throughout the morning. It's true, not just inside where we are on the campus of Johnson Space Center, but even at the entrance. That's about as far as most of the public can come, because security measures have been tightened ever since 9/11, obviously more so today. So the farthest they can get is to the front of Johnson Space Center, and we'll go ahead and show you some pictures of the scene out there. This is something that you see anytime people experience such a loss and want to express themselves publicly in terms of the sadness they're feeling. So the flowers have come out there, and as you just saw with Deborah Wrigley reporting live from the area outside the Johnson Space Center, a lot of people bringing their kids out there, something that certainly they wish never happened, but at the same time hoping the next generation will never forget. We have spent the morning in this area talking to different business owners, and you're really starting to see people react to this. In fact, even within hours of this tragedy, there were people changing the billboards out in front of their businesses from "Welcome Home, Crew" to "Our prayers are with your families" and "Peace be with you." So the tone changing very quickly this morning, and even some of the souvenir shops are having somewhat of a run in terms of people coming in and looking at some of these products and buying them as a sort of memorial. It is actually getting tougher and tougher now to find pictures of the Columbia Space Shuttle, and these are things that you can find very easily in normal times around the Clear Lake community. You've got pictures of the crew in here, and we actually spoke with one business owner who was somewhat familiar with this astronaut. Her nickname was Casey because it's a little difficult to pronounce her Indian first and last name, but they were always impressed with how friendly she was and coming in to the business, always happy to talk to folks, fans essentially of the program, and this community counts many fans in it. There are also lapel pins that have been very popular with people in this community, badges as well with the names of the crew members folks want, and then you're seeing these start to appear on folks' jacket lapels with that Columbia pin. So certainly the memorial has begun almost immediately here. The sense of remembrance very strong in this community, and throughout the day we'll be letting you know not only the official word here at Johnson Space Center, which of course everybody is anxious to hear whatever they're going to say at any given point, but we're going to tell you about the more human or personal side of how this is affecting this community that takes such great pride in having Johnson Space Center here and considers itself very supportive of this community, and today is just as devastated as anybody else. Reporting live from Johnson Space Center, Patrick Nolan, 13 Eyewitness News.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.
We heard from one man earlier, just a few moments ago, and he described the victims today, the astronauts, as American heroes.
Right.
I think that's a sentiment a lot of us are sharing.
Yep. Well, let's go live to Nacogdoches. Maya Shea is joining us on the telephone now to bring us more about the debris being found in that area. Maya, what's the latest?
Well, throughout the day, a lot of people have been calling into local authorities around the area saying they have debris in their yard, debris on their front lawn, debris on their driveway even, and we are just in the town of Nacogdoches. In fact, we're heading to one woman's home who says that she has several large, significant chunks of debris in her yard, and a lot of folks out here. This is kind of a sleepy town on a Saturday morning, not a lot of people out. Obviously, very many of them shaken by what has happened today. All of them heard the boom, felt their houses shake, and seeing literally debris raining down in their yards. We have seen video throughout the day of debris found off Highway 7 in the area, debris found, large chunks of debris near the Nacogdoches Airport, and large chunks of debris found at a local bank. So we are working on bringing you additional information of this video, and as soon as we have more, we'll bring that to you live in Nacogdoches. Maya Shea, 13 Eyewitness News.
Maya, as far as you know, no one has been injured by the falling debris, am I right?
Well, we have heard actually just recently some reports of people who might have been hit by some of this falling debris who are going to the local hospital right now for some treatment. We're trying to confirm that report. That hasn't been confirmed yet, but that's what we're hearing. Some anecdotal notes that people might actually be going to the local hospitals for treatment being hit by this debris.
And there were some huge pieces of debris from what I understand. Did you get a chance to see that debris that fell in the bank parking lot?
Well, the debris that fell in the bank parking lot is a curved black metal piece. It's very, very, very large. And then we have some other pieces that actually hit at the local highway area that are being guarded by National Guards and other local police officers. And then in addition, we had the sphere-looking object that was found at the Nacogdoches airport by some of the local folks there. And that was measuring several feet in diameter and several feet high. In fact, the size of taller than some of the small children who are standing around looking at the debris. So definitely a large variety of debris, different shapes, sizes, and a lot of metal objects all around this area.
Okay. I want to be sensitive when I ask this because we did have earlier reports that there were some human remains found in San Augustine County. Is anyone talking about that at all?
No one here in the Nacogdoches area has spoken about that. So far, we've just heard debris relating to metal parts and other curved parts that seem to have belonged to parts of the shuttle, maybe some tile and some silver-colored objects that are in the area.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Maya, of course, new information being that she has heard reports of possibly some people being injured by falling debris and going to local hospitals. I don't think that we had heard that before, not reported that, and it would definitely be amazing if no one was injured, given the amount of debris that fell and how widespread it is.
Yep, as in fact, someone said before, it is not an exaggeration, as someone said from Nacogdoches, to say that debris is everywhere in Nacogdoches and San Augustine County and some of the other counties as you head east toward the Louisiana border, and the wide debris field extends far into western Louisiana as well. There was some debris as well reported east of Texarkana, just north of the Louisiana line, in Arkansas as well. So when the Columbia exploded this morning in midair, some 40 miles in the atmosphere, the debris rained everywhere from the tremendous impact of that explosion. And again, you're looking at a graphic now from what we think is the extent of that debris field, some 75 miles long, maybe 30 or 40 miles wide as it goes into Louisiana.
All right, and I think we have another phone interview to go to right now.
All right. Here's Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison with some reaction earlier this morning. This is a taped interview.
Very important in finding the cause of this, and if people will call the local law enforcement or the DPS and give them that information about where they are. Now that we have cell phones, I think our people are going to be deputized really to try to help preserve this very important evidence. Well, of course, I'm on the committee that does oversee NASA, and I have been fighting for years to stop the drastic cuts that have come to NASA, because I think our mission is so important, and I don't think America should ever walk away from being in the forefront of space research. We're pushing the envelope, and it has given us the satellites that have been a part of our national defense. It has given us a quality of life in medical research with MRIs and CAT scans. It's now the next step of that mission, which will be research that can be done only in microgravity conditions that might be the cure to breast cancer or prostate cancer. So we need to be totally committed. Having said that, though, we can't do it on a shoestring budget. We know that there will be accidents along the way, and we need to make sure that we learn from every accident and move forward. And I know these astronauts and their families were committed to this research as well, and they would want to have every piece of evidence overturned to determine the cause of this so that no one else will have to suffer in this way.
Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison earlier this morning.
All right, we have Jessica Willie standing by in Nacogdoches with the latest there. What can you tell us?
Well, we are in historic downtown Nacogdoches, and as you can see behind me, there is a piece of debris, also white powder surrounding it. That's what we're seeing a lot of all around town. That debris looks from my vantage point, to be about a square yard, and then just beyond that, you can see the National Guardsmen standing by, making sure nobody gets close to this. And as you can see, the entire area is roped off. And then if you look beyond them, and to our left and to our right, you can see folks have just pretty much descended on the area. A lot of these people are going around all throughout town in search of debris, taking pictures, chronicling it for themselves. They want to see what is happening, see it for themselves. We've seen all kinds of stuff all around town. We've seen pieces 1 inch big, and then we've seen pieces as big as a car hood, and then again a lot of that white powder that I just showed you, and then guardsmen all around town also guarding it. We got police up around this debris as well. Now here in town, I'm trying to figure out how they're dispatching folks to guard this debris. Tried to call the Nacogdoches County Sheriff's Department, and we understand that they're waiting on word from NASA and from other federal government officials, because frankly they just don't know how to handle all of this. They're waiting till those folks get into town, or waiting for word to find out how they should handle all this. But I talked to the folks just east of here, San Augustine County. They say that they're taking hundreds of calls of reports of debris. They're taking down names and addresses and phone numbers, and then they're trying to dispatch sheriff's deputies and police officers out to them so that they can guard them, mark them off, and so nobody can get near them. And for the area, we have gone to places where there is debris and nobody's around, and there's no yellow tape and no guardsmen around them. For those places, a lot of the just regular old citizens are standing by, making sure nobody gets near, because as we've been telling folks all morning, all day long, don't get near this stuff. It could be toxic chemicals still on this debris. Unfortunate to report that we did get word of one man who put a piece of this debris in his car and drove it into town. Of course, that is not what folks need to do. They need to call the local authorities, let the people know that this debris is here, so that they can get out to it and seal it off. But again, really the folks in Nacogdoches County, the officials here are waiting on word for federal government officials. Meantime, all these citizens are just coming out trying to see for themselves what has fallen from the sky. Nacogdoches is where Stephen F. Austin University is. It's a university of about 10,000 students, and so we see a lot of students around. They're taking pictures, seeing for themselves what space is all about, what has fallen from the sky this morning.
Jessica, did
thunderstorm, but it lasted way too long. And, yeah, it was pretty scary. And there's debris scattered all east of town where I live.
So what'd you do? Just decide to get into your car and start driving around?
Right. And actually a piece of debris about the size of a small door fell about 300 feet from my trailer. So it really wakes you up to think,
Frightening?
Frightening, yeah. And sad. Very sad day for the NASA program, which I fully support.
Kind of paying homage here now, or
yeah,
paying respects to some extent?
It's almost surreal. It's hard to believe.
I mean, obviously something's right in front of your face that's part of it. It must be, I mean, it's hard to believe.
It's unbelievable. And I grew up in Houston. I've seen it sitting on top of a 747 many times and been through the NASA program. All my life had neighbors that ran it. And this just don't seem real. It's sad.
Are you fighting back tears?
Yeah, I am.
Back live, you can see that the flags are at half staff. We saw that all along Highway 59 as we traveled north up to this area. And you just heard from Terry Brown. As he said, he's from the Houston area. He follows the space program. He was going out to the debris sites really to pay his respects. I mean, he was choking up. He was fighting back tears. While this debris is sitting in front of everybody, a lot of people are going beyond that and realizing that there are 7 people's lives that have been lost this morning. And people are really saddened and touched by it.
Jessica, let me ask you 2 things. One, what a huge crowd behind you, or I should say across the street from you. It looks like hundreds of people. Are they just milling around town looking at things?
Yeah. Yeah, Nacogdoches, usually on a Saturday, it's a sleepy town. I mean, you'd see a few cars going through downtown Nacogdoches, but you certainly wouldn't see all of these people out. I mean, it's gridlock on the streets, and people are just walking around street corner to street corner, really trying to just find the different sites. And literally, there are hundreds of these pieces of debris all around town. Like I said, as small as an inch, as large as a car hood, and that's just what we've seen. Certainly, there are many other pieces that we haven't seen. We've seen pieces of debris that look like tile, some that look like have been burned, and then you see this white powder also, which we're still trying to figure out what that is. But certainly, this town has awakened, and I can only imagine that people within a 50-mile radius or perhaps beyond really have heard the news and are start driving this way.
And that's my second question about the white powder. Did people report the powder falling out of the sky? Did it seem like a snowfall, or does anyone know?
I haven't heard any reports of seeing the powder falling from the sky. In fact, most of the people we talked to, didn't actually see this debris coming and hitting the ground. They, heard the loud noise around 8 o'clock Central Time, and then they would hear, if it was a large piece of debris in their backyard or wherever it landed, they would hear a thump. But they, no one talked about this white powder. We're still puzzled as to what it could be, but certainly we see a lot of spots of it all around town, and really a lot of it when there isn't even debris nearby.
Well, this is Jessica. Just so you know, we're taking a look at some of your unedited video right now as we talk to you. This is the first that we've heard, I think, of this bizarre white powder that you're describing for us and that we have seen. Earlier, reporter Maya Shea told us that she had heard some reports of some people perhaps injured and going to the hospital from fallen debris. Have you heard any of those reports?
I haven't heard anything to that sort, and most of the really the reason is because I just can't, it's really tough to get through to these officials who I could get that information from. We've just pretty much had our sights set on getting around, getting these pictures of the debris, and then coming back here and bringing it to you live. So I haven't been able to get through to officials, and really a lot of the officials aren't talking to us because they're not sure what they should say or what they should release, and so I haven't heard any of those reports.
And you said that they're actually waiting on NASA to arrive?
From what I understand, that the Nacogdoches County Sheriff's Department, they're waiting for word. Now, I don't really know in what form that's going to come in, if it's going to be folks actually arriving in town or just from the phone, how they should handle this. How should they dispatch people? How should they collect it? Should they just leave it there? They're really waiting on word from government officials, obviously including NASA.
All right. Well, let me just tell you this. We have just heard that at least 20 people have gone to Nacogdoches Hospital just as a precaution, I guess, because they had touched the debris or come in contact with the debris. We don't know if anyone has been injured at all, and we don't even know if anyone's been treated, but we do now know that at least 20 people have gone to the Nacogdoches Hospital, so some people are picking it up and putting it in their trucks or putting it in their garages and trying to secure it as best they can by themselves.
And Jessica, as you told us, go ahead.
Yeah, as I just mentioned, is that I just got word from one of our photojournalists who's been out collecting video that, he came across a man who picked up a piece of debris, put it in his car, and started driving it towards town, and that's certainly what we're telling people not to do.
Let me ask you about this. We're looking at a picture of what looks like a huge ball in the middle of a field. Did you see that earlier?
I didn't.
Okay.
We have several crews here in town. We're collecting this video, and we're just trying to bring it back to the folks in Houston live.
Okay. Well, we can see it clearly here, and I don't know how big it is, but it looks to be substantial, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I've had dozens of people come up to me and telling me of, there's debris here, go to this street, it's this big, it's this small, and there's a lot of this stuff just all strewn across, East Texas.
And some streets and roads have been closed because of it, right?
Definitely, a lot of streets have been blocked off. The debris that's over my shoulder, this street here, this is in historic downtown Nacogdoches, and this street has been closed off. And you can see there's a sheriff's deputy as well as guardsmen who are just standing by. But no through traffic through this area.
Okay. Jessica Willey, thanks. Stay there. We'll come back to you when we get some more information from there. And again, those were live. Well, that was taped, that giant ball in the field, and some other raw video that we fed you that they shot earlier, another crew of ours shot earlier. But that looked like a substantial piece of whatever sitting in the middle of that field. It's hard to tell. There's no perspective. See how big it was, but it looked big.
And we have a number of crews out right now. Art Rascone has been driving around East Texas. He is on the phone right now. Art, where are you exactly?
We're about 20 minutes south of St. Augustine.
And what have you seen so far, Art?
Well, what we see here, at least on the side of the road, are just some areas that have been cordoned off and protected after these small pieces were found. The pieces that we have seen have just been small so far, but they have told us, all the sheriff's deputies as well, that there's some much larger pieces just scattered throughout the area. The wide range of pieces, I would imagine, would be, more than a couple of hundred square miles. So that's what I think is going to be extremely difficult for federal investigators to just try and find all of this material and then, of course, try and piece it together.
Do you get the sense of, if I can use the word bedlam there, as it appeared to be in downtown Nacogdoches? Are people in a frenzy looking for it, trying to get pictures of it?
Well, even the couple of places that we've found that were just on the side of the road, cars are stopping, a couple of folks getting out, trying to take the pictures. They've been cordoned off with tape. There seems to be a bit of frenzy of just trying to take some pictures of this type of thing, but I think more importantly, they're trying to protect it. And not only are there possible dangers and toxins associated with each piece, but as well, you want to not touch it. You want to wait for federal authorities to get a hold of it, and of course, trying to piece it all together, which in fact they'll do, and as they have done in times in past, trying to grab each piece in other air disasters of trying to put the thing back together.
And are there National Guardsmen on the scene near where you are, or is it just local authorities?
No, local authorities only. We've seen a number of sheriff's deputies, other patrolmen, even residents. And we walked up to an area, and the resident said, stay back, you're not allowed here. We were told by sheriff's deputies to keep this area cordoned off. So even some residents have been jumping on the bandwagon here and trying to join the forces of police officers and keeping the place protected, the areas protected.
All right, we're looking at some videotape shot earlier today of a field that was smoldering, apparently a fire caused by falling debris. I don't know if it's near San Augustine, but have you heard any reports from earlier this morning of fires being caused by the debris?
We have not heard any reports of fires, and sheriff's deputies didn't tell us of any reports of fires from the falling debris either. So, and that's not to say it's not happening. Perhaps it is, but one could assume that, you know, when you have this fireball in the sky, especially 200,000 miles above the earth, and falling at such a fast nature, it would be hard for me to believe that anything was still igniting, you know, when it actually hit the ground. But you never know.
Art, can you tell us from where you are, have you heard of any reports of injuries caused by falling debris?
No, no injuries, but things have fallen on individuals' homes. And we spoke with a sheriff's deputy that said, yes, a rather large piece fell on a home. On the roof, it's still there. It didn't crush the roof. And so far, no reports of injuries from our vantage point. And that's just traveling around the area of south of St. Augustine.
Yeah, well, and after this, lots and lots of people have stories to tell about where the debris came down, what they saw on this tragic day.
Sure, absolutely. And we'll be live with you here briefly in the next 30 minutes or so to report out of St. Augustine and a little bit more about what's going on there.
Okay.
Right.
Art Rascone.
Thank you, Art.
Okay.
Art Rascone telling us that even just in his experience that he pulled up to a site and just regular folk, people came up to him and said, hey, you know, we're preserving this site. It's amazing how many people are just coming forward and wanting to help.
Right.
Wanting to help officials.
Right. Well, as the NASA administrator said earlier this morning, a national coordinating team was put into place immediately. But the scope of the disaster, I think, is so big, perhaps they never felt that they would have to secure debris or fallen objects from such wide an area and to tell people what to do and what not to do with them. I mean, a debris field, as we show you in the graphic, as we've sort of been describing, and these are just loose parameters, but some people are saying it's about 75 miles long, stretches into western Louisiana, maybe 30 to 40 miles wide. Clearly visible on the radar this morning. If you're just joining us, it was an incredible shot on the radar this morning. Picked up the debris falling out of the sky this morning. In fact, the debris is still noticeable on the radar images that are just half an hour old. There are minute particles, microscopic particles, as our chief meteorologist Tim Heller said, that are probably still up there in the atmosphere, and the radar is still picking them up at this hour.
And not only we've seen the video and pictures of the debris that had fallen, but also video of some strange white powder Jessica Willey described for us and showed us.
Yes, and it didn't seem as if she said it was like falling in microscopic particles out of the air. It seemed like there were sizable chunks or piles of the white powder next to it, so perhaps that was something within the parts of the shuttle or parts of the equipment. It's very, very difficult to say. This was the radar composite from 7 o'clock this morning, and you see where it starts out. There's nothing on the radar at all. It's clear skies, and then you see the radar returns, and they stretch all the way to 1:15 this afternoon. That was a picture as of a half an hour ago. So that means there is still debris, microscopic particles, in the atmosphere that are being picked up by the radar, clearly visible 30 minutes ago.
And talking about the weather, this is probably the one thing that NASA officials were not worried about. It was a picture-perfect day outside, blue skies.
That's right. And as Ed Brandon said, 40 miles up, there is no weather. It's atmosphere. That's where the shuttle exploded this morning. The Columbia at about 8 o'clock this morning. NASA lost all communications with the shuttle Columbia, and it was just minutes after that that people reported seeing those bright streaks in the sky. Some people reported seeing what looked like an airplane swiveling in the sky or coming down at an erratic angle. And here are some of the early pictures shot this morning, just about 8:15 this morning, or just after 8 o'clock this morning. The shuttle Columbia was due to land at Cape Canaveral, Florida at 8:16 this morning. There were no indications of trouble before NASA lost contact with it about 8 o'clock this morning. And then this is what people in North Texas saw shortly after that, the shuttle literally disintegrating in midair. There is no indication of what happened, what went wrong. NASA has ruled out terrorism, at least from the ground. I'm sure some people will speculate that, could someone have gotten to the shuttle before it was launched? Could someone have planted something on the shuttle? But there is no indication, and security is so tight at the Kennedy Space Center that would have been almost impossible to have that happen. At least that's what a NASA expert said this morning. And the background checks our employees are just, they're redundant. They're done so many times that these people are checked over and checked over. So it just remains to be seen what caused this tragedy.
Exactly. In fact, NASA officials are heading out to many of the sites right now. We have James Campbell. He's the Cherokee County Sheriff on the phone right now. What can you tell us?
We have had over 40 different locations that we have confirmed that we have debris from the shuttle. The parts range from tiles, ceramic tiles, to twisted pieces of metal, from a small piece to 5 or 6 foot square. We're finding them in different locations. We found, I guess you could say, several hundred pieces at this time. And they're scattered pretty much to the Jacksonville, Texas, which is the northern part of our county, through Rusk, Maydale, and down toward the Alto area.
And Sheriff, have you heard any reports of anyone being injured by falling debris or touching debris?
I've had no reports of anyone in this county being injured or hurt in any way as a result of the debris falling, no.
Where were you this morning when this happened? What did you see and hear?
I was shaving this morning at my home when I heard it, and my wife asked me what it was, and I said, it's probably the shuttle going over. She said, well, something's wrong. We went outside and looked, and the vapor trail was just going everywhere. It looked like a piece of spaghetti. I said, well, if it was, something's terribly wrong.
You said you heard it. What did it sound like?
A sonic boom.
It did, because some people reported hearing a series of explosions.
Well, all I heard was the one boom, and the house shook just a little bit.
It did, so you immediately knew something was wrong. Had you heard the shuttle come over before with its sonic boom on the previous missions?
Yes, I went out and watched it come over before, and it was just like a bright light with a vapor trail coming over, and I wish I did not know it was even going to come over today. I wish I'd have known it.
Sheriff, a lot of people have reported, as you just said, 40-some sightings of the debris on the ground. A lot of people have been picking it up, trying to secure it themselves because they're just uncertain what to do. What are you telling people?
Do not touch it. If they will call their local law enforcement agency, they will send someone out to check it for them. It may be just a little while. We're getting over 100 phone calls an hour just at this office on debris, and I've got volunteer firemen, policemen, highway patrol, deputy sheriffs, everyone we can muster up going out to check these locations. If we find that it is, we're isolating it, roping it off. We had a man come by and bring some parts of it up here to us this morning, and we wish they would not touch it in any way.
And were there any reports of fires being started by the smoldering debris?
I've heard no fires being caused by it in this county whatsoever.
Okay. So Cherokee County. Is it an exaggeration to say the debris literally fell everywhere?
Yes, it did. We've had units going into a pasture to check for debris on the backside, and when they came back, there was debris in the road that had failed since they drove in the gate. I was told this morning that a debris pattern from a roughly Athens, Palestine, Rusk, and Jacksonville area, 2 hours after the explosion, it was still in the air, and it may take several hours for it to fall, the real light stuff, depending on the wind.
Right, and as we've seen from the radar return, Sheriff, there are still microscopic particles in the atmosphere that are being picked up by radar right now.
Yeah, we're still having reports of it falling. Okay. I think all the heavy stuff is probably on the ground, but I don't know how long it'll take to get it all down.
All right. Sheriff James Campbell of Cherokee County. Thank you much, Sheriff. I know you're a busy man. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Well, next we want to go to a former NASA employee. We have Scott Ream on the phone with us right now. Hello there.
Scott, can you hear us?
Yeah, hello.
And where are you, and what can you tell us?
I'm in Deer Park, but the round sphere you just saw was a fuel cell.
It's a fuel cell, okay.
Yes, sir.
And explain that to me. A fuel cell, would that have been in what part of the shuttle?
That would be in the aft part of the shuttle.
Okay, and would this have been a fuel cell used for re-entry, or how would this have powered the shuttle?
It may have contained oxygen, hydrogen, but it was just part of the fuel cell system that's in there.
All right, Scott, let me ask you another question. We've got a lot of reports of obviously the debris falling everywhere and a white powder next to many parts of the debris. Any idea what that could be?
No, sir, not at the time. No, I don't.
Okay. Any other indication about what parts we're seeing on the air or the parts you've seen in the video so far?
Well, the only thing I can identify was it looked like the outer part of the hull that was sitting in the triangle with the police, and the directional thruster, which had been found, I don't know what area, but that it looked like a rocket bottom. That was a directional thruster.
Okay. Now, were you, you say former NASA employee, did you work on the shuttle program?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. What can you tell me then about the crew cabin and the reinforcements that had been made to the crew cabin and other safety features since Challenger?
Now, see, that I had not worked on.
Okay.
And I was, unfortunately, departed from NASA in '97.
Okay. From what you've seen today, the indications are that it was a catastrophic explosion in the air, even though there are some pieces like this fuel cell we're seeing come down. And the president said there were no survivors. But would there be even larger pieces of the shuttle that you would expect to find, or is this perhaps the biggest?
No, I believe there'd be larger pieces. They haven't found the bulk of the crash yet, but you might find the main hull or the command carrier part.
What's that we're looking at right now?
That is a directional thruster.
Okay. Oh, that's what you talked about before. Okay.
Yes, sir, that's correct, yeah.
And those are those thrusters we see in the back of the solid, or the main fuel tank, right?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else from the video you've seen so far that has surprised you?
No, it's just a very tragic thing that I've seen, and my heart goes out to the whole family and everybody, but that is actually the worst I've seen.
You may or may not be able to answer this for us, but there's been a lot of concern about people actually touching or moving the debris. Can you tell us why that might be a concern?
Well, because some parts and some of the shuttle are radioactive. Some got hazardous materials that they do not want to get involved with or get on their skin or contact with at all. So I suggest do like they say, don't touch it, call your authorities, leave it be till they get there.
Right. Why do you say radioactive?
There are some parts that use radioactive materials in the shuttle, various components that use it to function with.
Right.
And you just don't want to mess with it.
Right. You know, Scott, we've talked about as the shuttle came down this morning and made its descent, it makes a series of banking maneuvers, and that is about the approximate time that the explosion occurred. Do you know more about how it's landed?
How it landed?
Or how it, how it makes its descent. It supposedly makes a series of banking maneuvers as it comes out of the atmosphere.
Yes.
Can you tell us any more about that? About whether a flight crew could have lost control during that?
That is possible. I mean, it's very touchy as you're doing your banking maneuvers. And at the speed they're coming down, I believe that they were going way too fast at re-entry, which also hurt them a lot.
That was something in the neighborhood of 38,000 miles an hour?
Yes.
Is that what somebody said? Close to Mach 13, right?
Mach 13, yeah, that's correct.
Let me ask you a question. We've had reports and actually seen video of some strange white powder that has been seen very near the debris.
Yes, that he asked me earlier. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. No idea at all?
No, sir, I'm afraid not.
When you're looking at the pictures, okay. And we're also looking at those pictures of parts that actually came through people's ceiling this morning. It is actually a wonder that people were not injured by the falling debris.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Scott Ream, can you hang on the phone for a second? We're gonna let you go, but hang on the phone because they want to get your phone number here so we can stay in touch with you for the next several hours here.
Yeah, if I can be of any help, I'll be...
All right, so Scott Ream, former NASA employee, we thank you very much. We're going to take you live back to the Johnson Space Center. Deborah Wrigley is one of our reporters there. Deborah, what's the latest?
Still talking with some families, and this one struck me. They are here with the American flags. They are here with red, white, and blue balloons, and they were here with flowers. Rennie Sable, you heard this morning. Your kids were in the library.
Yeah, we had a basketball game, and we went and dropped off our books, got into the car, turned on the radio, and there it was. So we hauled home and turned on the news.
You have been especially struck by all of this.
And I don't know why. I mean, we're new to Houston. We're from Las Vegas, but when we moved here, we got a part of the Houston Texans, and we went to the Space Shuttle Center, and you know, we talk about it all the time. He builds models with little astronauts, so when I explained to him what had happened and that our astronauts had died, I mean, they both started crying, and I had to pull him out of the corner. And so we're doing this just to pay our respects, to say goodbye, to tell the families that we love them and that we're praying for them, and, you know, put a little bit of closure for our family.
Because all of that, it's the stuff of dreams for children.
Yeah, it is, and I don't want him to be discouraged because things like this happen, you know, and it was a huge tragedy, and, you know, but we got to go forward. We got to go forward, and we got to pray for the families, and hopefully reach our dreams someday.
And, you know, it's a family of strangers here, because not everyone knew the people on board there, but you feel connected.
I do, and it was just moving to Texas I felt connected. In fact, when we moved here, I told the kids we were going to watch the shuttle take off, and my husband had to explain to me, they don't do that here. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess we won't. But, you know, we were excited, and we watched it when, you know, we watch it any chance that we can.
Any thoughts about the space program from this point?
My prayers are with them. I'm sure the people are hurt. I know a couple people that work with the NASA people, and I know they're in shock. And I pray for them, you know.
Ms. Sable, thank you so much. We'll let you go do your duty over there. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye, kids.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's what's been going on over here all morning. And this one especially poignant because there is a very patriotic bent to the tribute they are taking across the street. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Deborah Wrigley.
All right. We also want to tell you that we just got a statement from former President George Bush. He said, Barbara and I join all of America in grieving the tragedy of the apparent loss of seven astronauts. Barbara and I send our sincere condolences to the grieving families of the Space Shuttle Columbia astronauts. Our thoughts and prayers are with them. We also send our condolences to the greater NASA family and wish them strength and wisdom as they deal with this tragedy, a tragedy for NASA and indeed a tragedy for all of America.
And President Bush said this morning, confirming there were no survivors of this tragedy that occurred about 8 o'clock this morning. To briefly recap, if you are just joining live television coverage, which has continued since about 8 o'clock this morning, the Columbia was on a 16-day mission due to land at Cape Canaveral, Florida early this morning when people saw this in the skies over North Texas. The Columbia was making its descent about 40 miles above the Earth, traveling at nearly 38,000 miles an hour, when something went terribly wrong and the shuttle Columbia exploded in midair. Now, it was carrying 7 astronauts, 2 of whom had previous flight experience, the commander and a payload specialist. All 7 astronauts were apparently lost in the crash, or the explosion rather, and then the crash of that debris to the ground. A debris field then rained down from all the way in just south of Dallas, near Palestine, Texas, southeast of Dallas, all the way into Louisiana, into western parts of Louisiana. A huge debris field, some 75 miles long and 30 miles wide.
And when we say rain down, we really do mean that. It was nothing short of, people described the debris as coming down all over. People have seen the debris in their homes, on their cars, in their yards. We've had numerous phone calls from people who've actually picked up the debris and touched it and tried to move it. That is exactly what officials are asking people not to do. What you need to do is just contact your local authorities and let them know that you have seen it.
All right. There were radar images caught by ground radar in Louisiana that captured the debris as it was falling to the ground, just as it would have captured rain had it been coming to the ground. The radar images were quite substantial and lasted for several hours. In fact, this is the time lapse of that radar analysis that started at 7 o'clock this morning. Watch as they repeat it. There's nothing in the skies at 7, and then even until 1:15 this afternoon, you'll see the radar image of those microscopic particles still in the atmosphere, still showing up on radar some 5 hours after this tragedy happened. Again, this is the first time in the 42-year history of the U.S. spaceflight program that NASA has ever had a problem as a shuttle was landing. This tragedy comes 17 years and 3 days after the shuttle Challenger exploded on the launch pad, or after launch, January 28, 1986. 73 seconds into liftoff, the shuttle Challenger exploded. Now, 17 years later, we have another tragedy in the air.
And that's certainly something that we're hearing from a lot of people is it's happened again.
That's right.
The word
again and again.
We have Patrick Nolan standing by right now. He's at the Johnson Space Center. Patrick.
Good afternoon, and we understand that NASA is about to give a briefing any moment now, giving us more information. And when you talk about information on the Columbia, you are talking about a huge volume. I want to show you just some of what we picked up inside the media room here at the Public Affairs Office. Just look at one of these reports. I mean, the thickness of this thing and the detail. And I think a lot of times it is so difficult for the public and sometimes we reporters to understand just how much science and technology goes into one of these missions. But you look at these pages and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know the full impact of what's happened here when you see the pictures of those astronauts. The 7 members of that crew certainly are going to be missed here, and right now this community very much in shock. I'd like to show you some pictures that my photographer Johnny Rivera Marquez got in this area within the past couple of hours, and you will see that several billboards in the area have now been changed from welcome home crew to our hearts are with you and your families are in our prayer and you are brave pioneers and your works were appreciated. One of the businesses around here, and as you might imagine, there are a number of businesses here that really cater to the fact that not just tourists come here, but people choose to live in this community so that they can be close to NASA, where so many of them work. But one of the businesses here is a souvenir shop. It's been here for about 25 years, and the folks who own it say they were especially touched, just like everybody else. Here's what they had to say.
Well, we were just laying in bed listening to the morning news, and they had the breaking story, and it was like, oh my God, you know, is this really real? And it seems like it is.
Some of the pictures that they sell in that shop are of the Columbia, and I'd like you to take closely here, Johnny, see if we can zoom in, because this is an especially good picture and something that I think a lot of us don't always realize is the detail of the tile on the shuttle here. This is something that we often don't see because most television images are from so far away. That's what's made the most spectacular pictures, of course, the takeoffs and the landings. But we are hearing from our other crews throughout Southeast Texas that some of these tiles have been recovered as well. Perhaps recovered is a bad word. Spotted is what I should say, because recovered would imply that they've actually been picked up off the ground or taken from somewhere. And as we all know now, this is a no-no. It's almost haunting to look at these beautiful pictures, and which are very common in a lot of souvenir businesses around here, by the way, but it's almost haunting just to see it looking so perfect. As we all know, it was one of the older shuttles, and in fact, some of the shops just didn't have models of the Columbia inside because it had been around a while. It didn't have quite the glamour of Glenn's mission in that one. So there is certainly an interest in having some of these pictures, some of these patches and pins. Let me show you some of these that people want to get their hands on now. And it's not so much because, well, they may be considered valuable later, but I think in many ways, people in this community want to try to have a piece of what was there and a piece of that crew. You'll also see these small lapel pins. For the past year or so, we've been seeing so many people put American flags on their lapels, and perhaps we will be seeing more and more of these, especially in the Houston community where Johnson Space Center is so highly valued. And of course, something as, you know, cheap as a $2.95 program that basically lays out the mission, and this is in terms that most of us can understand. This is geared toward the public, again, with pictures of the crew. One of the reasons people had been showing up at some of these shops to get some of these pictures is because they wanted to put together their own memorials, not just outside the front gate of Johnson Space Center, but also in some of the communities around here. We understand that Poly Ranch subdivision near Pearland is where one of the astronauts lived. So some folks showed up at one of the shops, got some pictures and patches and flowers, of course, and decided to make a memorial just at the entrance of that subdivision. They don't want to go up to, obviously, the homes of these families and put anything on their front porch or disturb them in any way at what has become a very difficult day for them. We're going to be here throughout the day as well, bringing the official word from NASA, as well as some of the more personal and human suffering and perhaps celebration of what these pioneers did for space travel and just who they were as people, because unfortunately, just like Apollo 13, where people had gotten used to back then, guys going up to the moon, after a while, the public and the media didn't pay as much attention, and no doubt this is a big, painful chapter for the NASA community. So many times, even we here in Houston must confess, the media not always paying close attention to shuttle missions, and now the eyes of the world today on JSC. Reporting live, Patrick Nolan, 13 Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you, Patrick. We certainly have seen a lot of people moved by this tragedy, some to tears. Right now, we want to welcome Dave Ward. He's sitting in for Tom Cook, who's just stepped out.
Yes, we had thought up to this point, a lot of people thought, well, space travel has become routine, more or less. Over 100 of these shuttle launches and flights. And we're reminded today that spaceflight is anything but routine. It is very hazardous. This is truly a tragedy. We will be covering this throughout the remainder of the day. We have our reporters scattered all over the area. Let's go now. I understand we have reporter Maya Shea on the telephone. You're somewhere near Nacogdoches, right, Maya?
Yes, we are just outside of the city limits. We have actually recently seen 2 or 3 of the larger chunks of debris along Highway 21 between Nacogdoches and the Douglas area. There was one section that involved some fabric, if you will. It looked like charred fabric and metal twisted along the side of the highway. Local residents found it just after 8 this morning. That part wasn't marked off, but a lot of people, interestingly, curiosity seekers rather, would drive up and down these roads, stop whenever they see a marking, and stop, get out of the car, and take pictures. We also had just down the street from this one piece of debris that we saw was an additional some large metal pieces in an abandoned cafe, and the Douglas area local firefighters were actually standing guard to make sure nobody gets on that property, because as we have heard throughout the day over and over again, people are not supposed to touch these. They're not supposed to remove these debris items at all. Unfortunately, when you have a situation like this, we have heard of people who have come onto the scene actually asking to take this away. Maybe they were going to sell it. So disappointed to hear things like that happening when such a tragic event has taken place.
Maya,
we also talked.
Hello, Maya.
Go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead. You also talked what?
We also talked to the local hospital officials who said a lot of people, they have about 15 to 20 people throughout the morning who were concerned that they might have been exposed to any of the chemicals that was in the shuttle. They were near the debris, have come into the hospital. Officials say so far no one has actually been injured. They've taken a running tally, name, number, address, so forth, of these people who've come into the local hospitals to make sure that they can contact them if need be. But so far they haven't actually treated anyone for specific injuries. Dave?
Right. We have heard that, well, this debris field covering hundreds of square miles across East Texas, and some areas, people have been urged to go out and search their property. A lot of this is farmland, ranch land, and they've been sent out to look on their property to see if they can find pieces of the Shuttle Columbia. Have you heard the same thing?
We have not. We have not heard people actually searching, but, you know, natural human curiosity leads a lot of the folks in this area of East Texas to go out to their ranches and farmlands, and a lot of them have found items. In fact, we talked to a lot of the volunteer firefighters who are kind of being scattered about to areas where there are larger pieces that they said they, from people all across the area, that they might have found just a small chunk or a larger chunk. In fact, we know several large chunks have fallen around the Highway 3 area near Douglas, and they've actually had to block off the road just to make sure that no one comes in or out or takes any pieces before investigators can get to the scene.
Okay,
Dave?
Maya, where are you headed now?
We are in the Nacogdoches area. We are going to stop by one area we see right now where some National Guard members are on the scene. So we're going to check that out right now and see what kind of debris is in that area.
Okay, and you'll get back to us. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Maya Shea reporting from near Nacogdoches. We have just been handed here on the set the Houston Chronicle, a tear sheet of an extra that is being printed up even as we speak that says shuttle disaster. Columbia breaks up over Texas on reentry. All 7 astronauts declared dead. White House says terrorism unlikely. And then more down at the bottom. This will be a Houston Chronicle extra, which I'm sure will be hitting the streets here within the next few minutes. We just got the initial tear sheet on that. Christy Myers has joined us here to give us a little bit on some of the fears of possible toxic chemicals, things of that, and radioactive material.
People have been calling in, and they are concerned because NASA has apparently said, don't touch this, this could be toxic. Well, people are worried about the report of toxins and the chemical most often named today as hydrazine. Hydrazine is a propellant or fuel for the space shuttle, and when it lands, there has always been a risk that residual hydrazine in the fuel tank, along with ammonia, which is in the tank, could explode when combined with air. Now, NASA has long had sensors and a detector for these fuel vapor concentrations that it uses at the landing. But what could hydrazine do to you? Well, I'm told it is caustic and corrosive. That's why NASA doesn't want people to touch the debris or breathe the vapors that might be coming off the debris. Also because NASA has asked to get these parts and get them back and put them back together so they can reconstruct the shuttle during the investigation. Now, you can see the vapors in the sky after the shuttle exploded. We asked about that, and one expert told me privately that if the chemicals in those flumes were high, as they were, and dispersed as they came down, they're not likely to be a health threat to the communities below. What they're worried about is the concentrated vapors, and hopefully that these were widely dispersed. We can see that the wind patterns blew them a long way. So it's the concentration in those individual parts that they were worried about people touching or breathing fumes from.
From over 200,000 feet and at a speed of 12,500 miles an hour, and that fiery fireball through the sky, it's really hard to understand that anything of a hazardous nature could have survived all of that and still be a hazard once it hits the Earth.
That's true, and that's the one thing that's going to probably reassure people. It was so high, it was moving so fast, and it dispersed so quickly. So hopefully that won't be an issue, and the other issues will be what happened and how to prevent it from happening again.
But NASA officials certainly wanting to be very careful, and again, warning people, asking people, if you do come across any type of debris, do not touch it, do not move it, contact your local authorities.
That's right.
Thank you for that, Christy.
Yes. Well, this is a tragic day for the United States and for the space program and for the world in general. There is mourning in Israel, the first Israeli to be in space. There is mourning in India because this was the first astronaut to go in space that was born in the country of India. The female astronaut who died in that fiery re-entry explosion today. This is a scene just outside the entrance to the Lyndon Johnson Space Center where you can see people are coming by. These are our neighbors down in the Clear Lake NASA area that knew the astronauts, knew their families, and they put together, starting to make a makeshift memorial right there at that sign with balloons, flowers, some notes and flags and things of that nature. It is indeed a day of mourning for a tragic occurrence, the explosion of the Space Shuttle Columbia, which was the first space shuttle to be launched years ago and had gone through numerous flights. What this will do now to the space agency and the future of space exploration is still unclear. There is already an independent board has been put together to investigate the cause of this terrible tragedy, in addition to a NASA investigation, and it may be weeks, months before we can really determine exactly what caused this terrible tragedy this morning.
One of the first things to show up here at this memorial site were those yellow balloons that you see there, 7 yellow balloons representing the 7 lost astronauts. As you said, a very tight-knit community and
Yes.
one that is being affected.
Yes, the commander of the flight from Amarillo and had flown a couple of other space missions before Columbia. This 16-day mission, I think it was, it was not to the International Space Station. This was for experimental purposes and other important mission accomplishments on this. The shuttle, they're now saying that it appeared to begin trailing fiery debris as it was passing over eastern California early this morning. That's well before it disintegrated over Texas. This is according to a California Institute of Technology astronomer who witnessed this fiery transit through the sky. Anthony Beasley says he observed the shuttle's re-entry from outside his home in Bishop, California, near Caltech's Owens Valley Radio Observatory. This is a quote: "As it tracked from west to east over the Owens Valley, it was leaving a bright trail. As it actually moved over the valley, there were a couple of flashes. Then we could see there were things clearly trailing the orbiter subsequent to that." That is a quote from Beasley. He said he and his wife, Arlene, or his wife Ann, and their mother-in-law had gone outside in the early morning darkness to watch the re-entry from that small town about 225 miles north of Los Angeles. Said he'd never witnessed a shuttle re-entry before. He's not an authority on shuttles, but he immediately thought that Columbia was having problems. Here's another quote. "In particular, there was one very clear event where there was a piece that backed off the orbiter. It was giving off its own light, and then it slowly fell from visibility." Beasley said he thought the shuttle might be losing some of the heat-resistant tiles that protect it during a fiery re-entry. Said he didn't learn of the shuttle's destruction until he went to the observatory and compared notes with two news photographers who had arranged to photograph the re-entry through the telescope. He said they compared notes, all agreed they had seen what he termed the bright event, the third event. "The analogy, I think, is it looked like the shuttle dropped a flare," he said. Those are direct quotes from this Anthony Beasley, who observed the shuttle's re-entry near Bishop, California, which would indicate that they were in trouble before the actual disintegration of the spacecraft over the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And there was just an extreme trail of debris, and much of that actually showed up on radar here in our area.
Exactly. If you are just turning on the television set today and finding out what happened, you may not have seen some of the images we showed you earlier in the day that were picked up by Doppler radar. Now, remember what radar is, weather radar. Weather radar sends a pulse into the atmosphere, which bounces off of raindrops, drops of water, or anything else in the atmosphere. You're used to seeing weather radar showing precipitation. In this case, the radar beam is bouncing off particles which were part of the shuttle, and they are being reflected back to Earth. And so you see what appears to be a line of thunderstorms there between Lufkin and Shreveport at about 8 o'clock this morning, from 8 until 11 o'clock this morning. Well, that's not rain, folks. That is the breakup of the space shuttle, and that is the debris trail that moved from northwest to southeast during the morning. Now, I cannot show this to you frame by frame for technical reasons, but let me tell you this. The sequence you're looking at goes from about 7 o'clock this morning until about 1:30 this afternoon. At 8 o'clock, there is nothing between Lufkin and Shreveport. At 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, the next photograph in this sequence, there is that first long line that you see. That's how rapidly this happened. Now, this was we're probably picking up particles that were about, let's say, 5 to 6 miles up in the atmosphere. Probably 5 to 6 miles up. As a matter of fact, Tim Heller, our chief meteorologist, is standing by in the Weather Center. I hate to direct from the floor, but if the audio man can turn on his microphone. Tim prepared this loop and may be able to tell us more. Tim?
Well, Ed, what we're looking at here is what we call a composite reflectivity image, and it is the radar looking at all levels of the atmosphere. Normally when we look at thunderstorms on the radar, we're simply looking at what we call surface reflectivity, or the rain that's hitting the ground. But in this case, composite reflectivity looks at all levels of the atmosphere and presents it as one image. So what you're seeing here is debris that most likely is coming into the atmosphere, as you said, 5, 6, 7 miles above the Earth, and then slowly descending through the atmosphere. What you also notice here at the beginning of the sequence is one very fine line, and then as the debris slides to the southeast, the upper level winds blowing at about 20 to 25 knots, certainly helping to disperse that. And the echoes we're seeing toward the end here are very, very fine echoes, which would be an indication of a very, very fine target in the atmosphere.
I also forgot to point out that this is Doppler radar from the National Weather Service installation in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And it's significant what you just said, the fine particles. We're actually seeing, according to this, that there is still some particulate matter, very small though it is, suspended up there in the atmosphere. Am I right about that?
Yes, exactly, Ed. You know, the military at times will shoot very fine little microscopic aluminum particles into the air, chaff they call it, and they use it to track radar. They use it for military operations, and a lot of times it'll tell you what they're using it for, but it's not uncommon for them to spray that into the atmosphere in some of their exercises. So when we're talking microscopic here, we're talking particles that would slowly descend in the atmosphere simply because they are so small. Obviously, if they were heavier, they would fall out of the sky quicker, but because they're almost just kind of floating in the air. Winds are light today, so this may take a while for this to completely blow out of the air.
And I have something else that we can show the folks out there. It doesn't actually give us any new information, but it certainly gives some gee-whiz pictures. The director, if you can punch up weather 2, there you go. This is another of our radar displays. We call this Tornado Hunter. We're not putting the Tornado Hunter bug on there today because we certainly aren't talking about tornadoes. But that line of radar echoes that you're looking at there that moves just to the south of Interstate 30, that's the debris field. Now, we've twisted the picture. Fort Worth, Dallas are at the top of your screen, and Alexandria, Louisiana is in the bottom of your screen, and you're looking at the debris field as it moves across US 59 down toward Alexandria, Louisiana. Again, what we're seeing in the last frame there is some very, very fine particles in the air. Just to the line that goes through Shreveport, by the way, that's I-30.
Ed, on Weather Source 1 again, I've got a close-up view of that radar sequence we were showing you a moment ago with Nacogdoches marked there, and you could see how that plume goes right across that city from Palestine to Nacogdoches before moving eastward.
And that's why the folks in Nacogdoches are finding particles inside some of the buildings there today, because it moved right over. That's probably, as best I can tell, the most populated community under the debris field.
And Nacogdoches is where Eyewitness News reporter Jessica Willey is standing by live right now. Jessica, what can you tell us?
And Dave, we're in downtown Nacogdoches. Just over my right shoulder, as you can see, is a piece of debris. It looks to be about a square yard big, I should say, and just beyond them, guardsmen guarding it, and beyond those guardsmen, we've got people who are just curious about what this debris looks like. Of course, that included, along with that debris, is white powder, that white powder we've been talking about all day long. Also to my right is a makeshift memorial. We'll show those pictures to you in just a few moments, but a makeshift memorial of flowers. People have come to this area to see the debris and also to pay their respects to those the crew members who were lost in this disaster. Around town, all kinds of reports of debris. Right now, as we speak, there's a media briefing going on at the Sheriff's Department, so I'll bring you that new information as soon as I get it. But all around town, we've been getting folks coming up to us saying, hey, there's debris here, there's debris there, there's debris. We've seen debris as small as an inch, as little itty-bitty pieces to as large as the car hood. That piece fell in the backyard of an elderly woman, her backyard, and she says she heard a loud boom first, and then she heard a thump in her backyard. That piece of debris was as large as the car hood. And then all around town, you see all kinds of different pieces of debris. We saw one man who actually picked it up, put it in a piece of newspaper, what we've been telling people not to do all day long, and brought it into town to show authorities. Again, that's not what you should do. A lot of curiosity seekers all across town here. Usually on a Saturday, Nacogdoches is a sleepy city. Maybe some folks are in town to shop on the Main Street shops, but relatively not busy on a Saturday. And right now there's gridlock. There are a lot of people. I can only imagine that people have come from a 50-mile radius, perhaps even beyond, to come to Nacogdoches to see all of this debris, because we've been getting the reports that this is one spot where there's a lot of it. I did talk to the officials in neighboring San Augustine County. They tell me that basically they don't have a plan of action of how they're going to track this debris and collect it or even just rope it off. They tell me that they're just taking down people's names and addresses and phone numbers, and they're going to try to dispatch sheriff's officials or police officers out to the area as soon as they can. But here in Nacogdoches, the guardsmen have been mobilized. They were mobilized fairly quickly, probably within an hour or two after they got reports of debris, and they've been standing watch at all the places that they have been told there is all these little pieces of the shuttle where they've landed. We have come across some places, though, that people haven't reported, and so they're just sitting there. People have marked them with play swords that they have in their backyard with yardsticks just sticking out of the ground, marking a little small piece of tile, or even the larger pieces of debris that they have in their yards, along the streets, along the sidewalk. We saw a box that kind of roped off one area, and then again we saw that white powder we've been talking about. We're trying to figure out what that is. People have circled that off. Because we've been told, not to get close to this white powder or this debris, but certainly this town has become a bevy of activity since all this started earlier this morning.
Jessica, quick question for you. We've had some reports of some people actually taking the pieces and driving off with them, perhaps hoping to sell them later. But we've had more reports of people coming forward and actually roping off whatever debris they come across themselves and waiting for authorities.
Well, I think the majority of people want to help the authorities. They've been, the people who have actually touched it
Jessica, pardon me, we've got to go to the Johnson Space Center now. I think a news conference is underway.
As Chief Flight